Welcome back, stay here and subscribe.
Vitellius, the emperor of excess, devoured by his own empire. In the long and bloodied scroll of Roman history, the year 69 AD is not written in ink, but in flame. Known to later generations as the Annus Horribilis, the year of the four emperors, it bore witness to the collapse of political continuity, the civil war of titanic ambition, and the rise and ruin of men too frail to master the whirlwind of power. After Nero's suicide ended the Julio-Claudian dynasty, the imperial throne became a throne of swords, where each new occupant bled faster than the last. Following the noble suicide of Otho, the empire passed to a most unlikely heir, Aulus Vitellius. Neither a statesman nor a soldier of great renown, Vitellius was instead remembered, even in his own time, as a creature of appetite. Tacitus called him lazy and gluttonous, Suetonius mocked his weakness, and yet, for 8 months, he was emperor of Rome. Born in 15 AD into a noble family with senatorial connections, Aulus Vitellius enjoyed a privileged but undistinguished early career. He was consul under Claudius, proconsul of Africa, and, importantly, a known favorite of emperors for one curious trait: he could flatter well. Nero enjoyed his company because of his indulgent nature and disregard for formalities. Vitellius knew how to make himself agreeable to the powerful and invisible to their suspicions. When Galba seized power after Nero's death, he appointed Vitellius governor of Germania Inferior, perhaps believing him to be harmless. It was a fatal underestimation. Once in command of the Rhine legions, battle-hardened, restless, and angry at being overlooked in imperial affairs, Vitellius won their affection not with discipline, but with ease. He dined with them, gambled with them, drank deeply, and dismissed protocol. His lack of pretension was seen as honesty, his indulgence mistaken for camaraderie. The legions proclaimed him emperor in January 69 AD, even before Galba had fallen. Word of Galba's assassination and Otho's rise reached Vitellius just as his legions began to march. The die had been cast, and the civil war became inevitable. 2 generals, Caecina and Valens, led Vitellius's forces into Italy. Their discipline was questionable, their behavior brutal, but their military prowess was undeniable. Villages were looted, cities plundered, temples defiled. These were not armies marching under an emperor of law, but hordes of mercenaries, fueled by the promise of reward. When they met Otho's legions near Bedriacum in northern Italy, blood flowed like wine. The battle was long, uncertain, and cruel, but Otho's decision to engage prematurely led to disaster. His forces broke, the battle was lost. Otho chose death, and Vitellius, still in Gaul, inherited an empire. In Rome, he was greeted with uncertainty. The Senate had no illusions about who they now served. Vitellius was not a man of vision or policy. He entered the city not in triumph, but in parade. A conqueror carried by brute force, not virtue. Yet there was jubilation among the lower classes, for he promised games, spectacles, and cancellation of debts. To the upper classes and military aristocracy, however, his arrival marked the beginning of chaos. Vitellius was a man of overwhelming physical presence. Suetonius describes him as obese, with a face red from drink and eyes dulled by overindulgence. He held court not in the Senate chamber, but in dining halls. His banquets became infamous, lavish affairs with rare delicacies imported from every corner of the empire. Night after night, entire fortunes were spent on single meals. He was said to have eaten 4 enormous meals a day, each worthy of an emperor's coronation. Dishes such as flamingo tongues, dormice soaked in honey, and the livers of exotic fish became daily staples. But it wasn't only his belly that consumed. Vitellius fed on the empire itself. He disbanded the elite German bodyguard unit established by Nero, seeing them as loyalists to his predecessors. He surrounded himself instead with former actors, chariot racers, and cooks, those who pandered to his vices. Justice, law, and tradition were replaced with feasting, gossip, and revenge. Suspected enemies were executed without trial. Rich men were accused of treason and robbed. His reign, though brief, was marked by systematic looting of the imperial treasury and sacrilegious plundering of temples, including the temple of Jupiter Capitolinus, whose treasures he melted to pay his debts. He was, in a word, unfit, and in the East, the legions knew it. In Judea, fighting a bitter war to suppress a Jewish rebellion, stood Titus Flavius Vespasian, a man of humble origin but iron will. Vespasian was beloved by his troops and respected by the Senate. He had not declared for any faction during the earlier turmoil. waiting like a hawk in still air. But Vitellius's corruption made neutrality impossible. The Eastern legions proclaimed Vespasian emperor, and the march to Rome began again. Vitellius did little to stop it. He spent his final months in orgies and excess. His support weakened as provincial governors defected. Even in Rome, his hold was fragile. His generals, Caecina and Valens, proved disloyal. One imprisoned by his own men, the other captured and executed. As the Flavian army, led by Marcus Antonius Primus, advanced, Vitellius offered no resistance. He attempted abdication, appearing before the Senate in mourning robes. He declared his wish to retire to Campania and live as a private citizen. But power, once tasted, does not release its hold so easily. His supporters refused to let him go. For 2 days he vacillated, retreating, then returning to the palace, issuing orders, then rescinding them. The city descended into panic. On December 20th, 69 AD, Vespasian's forces entered Rome. What followed was not a clean transition, but civil war within the walls of the Eternal City. The Vitellians made a desperate last stand on the Capitoline Hill. The Temple of Jupiter itself, Rome's holiest site, was set ablaze. Flames devoured the past as soldiers clashed in the streets. What the Parthians and Germans could not do, Romans did to themselves. It was a self-inflicted sack. Vitellius hid. He was found in the imperial quarters, disguised, trembling. Dragged through the streets by Vespasian's men, he was paraded like a carnival beast. Rome watched with bitter pleasure as the emperor of gluttony and cowardice was beaten, mocked, and spat upon. At the Gemonian stairs, the steps of death, he was stabbed repeatedly. His body was mutilated, thrown into the Tiber like so much waste. He had ruled for just over 8 months. In the final accounting, Vitellius left no monuments, no reforms, no victories. His reign was an interlude of shame between tragedy and redemption. He was remembered not for what he did, but for what he allowed, the disintegration of imperial dignity into farce. Yet even in condemnation, Rome could not fully erase him. He was the reflection of its own excesses, the embodiment of what the Principate could become when stripped of discipline and virtue. He showed the danger of confusing popularity with leadership, indulgence with strength. In the aftermath, Vespasian arrived not as a conqueror, but as a restorer. He brought order, rebuilt the city, and founded the Flavian dynasty. But even as Rome healed, the memory of Vitellius lingered, not as a tyrant, but as a warning. For empires do not fall only to enemies. Sometimes they fall to appetite,